Since 1942, the sacred and beautiful grounds of the Marist Brothers Centre in Esopus have been utilised to foster the mission of the Marist Brothers, which is to make Jesus Christ known and loved, especially amongst young people and the most neglected. In its early years, the current retreat house was the home of Marist Prep, which was a high school for young men who were interested in becoming Marist Brothers. The mansion and the Holy Rosary buildings were also utilised as formation houses for many brothers who did their postulancy and novitiate years in Esopus. During this time period, thousands of young men attended Marist Prep and completed a Marist Brothers formation on these holy grounds.
Many alumni of Marist Prep and brothers who were trained here on the property shared how Brother John Berchman was the most influential teacher in their lives. Brother John Berchman, better known as Berkey, never taught a single day in any formal classroom, yet he was a master teacher to generations of young people. He spent 38 years here on the property of Esopus and served in many roles, including prefect to the juniors who live and attended school at Marist Prep. As prefect, he organized all their sports leagues and was an accomplished hockey player himself. He supervised the dormitories and organized the work periods. For the brothers who were in formation, he was a mentor, role model, and the person that would oversee all the manual projects on the property. Berkey exemplified many of our Marist pillars, especially simplicity, love of work, and in the way of Mary. In his later years, he continued to be the main caretaker of the property and would oversee many of the volunteers who came to Esopus in the 1970s and 80s, including another honoree tonight, Tom Brophy. He was a true inspiration to all who worked with him. He had a great devotion to Mary, our good mother, and would spend many hours walking the grounds of Esopus praying the rosary, especially in the Brothers' Cemetery.
In the late 1960s, the Marist Brothers Center at Esopus re-envisioned itself and its purpose, as the need to host Marist Juniorate was no longer required. Questions arose as to how the property might best continue to foster the mission of the Marist Brothers in new ways. A group of young brothers, led by Brother Philip Robert, Brother Leo Richard, and others, created a weekend retreat program for high school students called the Marist Encounter. This program is now 55 years old and still impacts many young people each year. The Marist Encounter program quickly grew and was adopted by all Marist schools around the country. Here in Esopus, the program continues to be offered numerous times a year and is likewise offered in our Marist schools in Massachusetts, Texas, Florida, and Illinois. Generations of young people have frequently reflected that this weekend retreat was one of the major stepping stones in their faith life and journey. The Encounter program continues to be one of the most concrete ways that young people come to know and love Jesus in a real and personal way. And so the MBCE continues to welcome thousands of young people each year to the property for encounters and other retreat experiences. And these profound moments in the lives of these young people allow the vision of the MBCE to become a true lived reality. The MBCE vision statement states that in Esopus, the presence of God is discovered in a new way by young people and adults alike. Hearts are touched, lives changed, and Jesus is made known and loved. The center offers experiences of community, service, and spiritual formation in a setting of great natural beauty. And so the MBCE continues to be a sacred space, a holy ground, where God's grace touches people in many different ways.
In the early 1970s, the MBCE continued to expand its utilization of the property. The retreat program continued to grow, but was only offered during the school year. It was during this time another group of Esopus dreamers, visionaries, and risk-takers would forever change what summertime in Esopus could mean as the Esopus camps began to be founded. With encouragement from Brother Leo Forrest, Brother Steve KAPPES dared to begin our first camp in 1971 and would continue to be one of the directors of Transfiguration Camp for all of his 34 years. As Brother Steve began to plan for that very first camp experience for the children of Chinatown, he was approached by Brother Dave COONEY and Sister Chris Donnelly, who met with him in the administration of Transfiguration School to ask if their camp would be open to allowing 10 disabled children to also participate in this new venture of a summer camp in Esopus. It was in that very first meeting many of the most critical attitudes of what distinguishes Esopus as a magical and sacred place came into being. Brother Steve and the administration of Transfiguration could have easily insisted that this camp was for their kids only, and that it was too big of a risk to ask their kids to accept these children with disabilities. Their decision to allow that first camp to welcome 30 children from Transfiguration Parish, alongside 10 disabled children, set into action an attitude that all are welcome and that all will be loved equally.
Our camps in Esopus, from their inception, were willing to take such calculated risks that others might not be willing or open to make. That attitude of not being afraid to risk in order to create opportunities for the least favoured has continued to be passed on throughout the history of the Mid-Hudson Valley camps. It was passed on quickly in the years that followed, when the risk was taken to create the first camp solely for disabled kids in 1973. For many years, Brother Dave COONEY and Sister Chris Donnelly would remain a vital link to helping the camps grow and expand into what they are today. It was Sister Chris who recruited Ed and Pat McCormack into helping start the camp for deaf children of St. Francis de Sales School. Ed and Pat not only were willing to volunteer to help found Deaf Camp, but also served as the camp directors for the first 40 years. The commitment of the Mid-Hudson Valley camps to continually find ways to serve the most neglected and underprivileged persons in our world is one of the most meaningful ways that our Marist Brothers mission has lived in the United States. During its history, the camps have served not only disabled children and adults, but also children with HIV, cancer, and many from some of the poorest and the most disadvantaged neighborhoods in New York City.
Another legend of this early time period is Brother Declan Murray, who not only founded the Malloy Freshman Camp, which today is named in his honor, but also brought generations of students to Esopus from St. Helena High School in the Bronx and Archbishop Malloy. He brought them for encounters, retreats, camps, and many work weekends. Over the past 50 years of summer camps in Esopus, thousands of volunteers have fulfilled every possible role in allowing both the camps and all the other programs in Esopus to flourish and grow. While Esopus continues to exist on the strength of its many volunteers, two such volunteers have witnessed this commitment in ways few others could ever imagine.
For 25 summers, Brother RAOUL MOLNAR would get into his car on the day school ended, and he would drive straight to Esopus to serve as one of the main cooks for the summer camps. Most of the summer cooks would volunteer for one or two camps. Brother RAOUL, he cooked 7 days a week, each one of those 25 summers, for 8 out of the 9 camps. And he used his 1 week off to go on his annual retreat. At the end of the summer, he would return to school and would spend at least another 10 weekends a year, leaving school on a Friday afternoon to drive up to Esopus to cook for encounters or school retreats. At the end of his 25th consecutive summer of keeping this unbelievable and heroic schedule, he declared that he was retiring from his cooking duties. He had a different definition, however, of what retiring meant than most. His version meant that he simply reduced his volunteering down to 6 weeks each summer and 6 weekends each school year. He continued that effort of being in the kitchen every morning that he cooked before 6 a.m. And he would labor joyfully every day to ensure that every camper or young person on retreat had a great meal. Sadly, he left us too early in life after his battle with cancer. But he left behind for all of us a lasting legacy of witness of how one might humbly serve the least among us in a quiet and hidden way.
Mr. Tom BROPHY began volunteering in Esopus as a freshman in high school in 1968 when Brother Joanne Silem brought him up for a work weekend. Tom quickly fell in love with the property and instantly began to embrace the Marist pillar of love of work. During his early years, he spent endless hours working alongside many of the older brothers, such as Brother Sylvan, Brother John BERCHMANS, and Brother Theophile, and has worked with every single brother and almost every other maintenance volunteer that has set foot on these sacred grounds since that day in 1968. There are a few trees, plants, or stones on the property that have not been brought to life by Tom's gifted hands and vision. Like so many of the volunteers of Esopus, he is a most humble person and simply dedicates his many hours of service out of pure love for this special place and its unique mission. Tom never forgot the impact that those brothers he first knew had on him. He often recalls how it was Brother John BERCHMANS who would always say to him, "Take care of the cemetery." Our newly remodeled cemetery may very well be Tom's lasting legacy, as his many hours of hard work and vision helped allow it to become a place even John BERCHMANS would be proud of.
The great Yankee player Lou Gehrig is still remembered as the original Iron Horse of baseball for his long streak of consecutive games. Quite simply, Brother RAOUL and Tom BROPHY are the two Iron Horses of Esopus volunteering for their long streaks of consecutive years of endless sacrifice, which will never be forgotten.
During the 1970s into the 1980s, several brothers who lived in Esopus who worked full-time in other jobs would also serve at various points as the director of the property. This amounted to overseeing its finances and coordinating dates with camp or retreat directors who would utilize the property. Brother John BERCHMANS worked full-time on the property as the chief caretaker of the grounds during this period. In 1983, Esopus transitioned into a new era with Brother NUGENT began his term as the full-time director of the property and all the programs that happened in Esopus. For the next 27 years, he guided a great period of continued growth and welcomed thousands of campers, volunteers and retreatants with his warm embrace, his smile and a heart as big as Texas. After his retirement as director of Esopus in 2012, he spent a few years working back in Texas before returning home to Esopus, where he treasured his work as a spiritual director to many who would seek his wisdom and spiritual guidance. Sadly, he is not with us tonight, as he was one of so many in our world who tragically were victims of the COVID-19 pandemic. His lasting legacy, friendship and love will always live on in the many lives he impacted.
In the year 2000, two members of our Esopus family, namely Brad Cantinas and Yvonne Kamen, helped create the first Esopus Century Ride. They did so in an attempt to alleviate the burden of the increasing transportation expenses associated with the summer camps. A few weeks ago, 19 riders completed the 12th Century Ride. Over the years, Joe McMiniman, Dan Reagan, and others have followed Brad and Yvonne in spearheading all the organizational components of this amazing biannual event. More than 50 different riders have now completed an Esopus Century Ride. Damien Shiano and Joe McMiniman have both completed 11 out of the 12 Century Rides. This event has raised more than $200,000 to assist many needs and projects of the MBCE and our camps. Damien Shiano will receive tonight's Hall of Fame award on behalf of this incredible group of dedicated benefactors to Esopus.
Our last Esopus Hall of Fame recipient tonight is Mr. GERALD DUNWORTH. Jerry has the distinction of being the longest-serving member of the MBCE Mid-Hudson Valley Camp Board, formerly known as the Marist Brothers of Ulster County Board. For many of those years, Jerry served as the board chairperson, and his leadership and commitment to the mission of Esopus was beyond extraordinary. Both of his daughters volunteered at numerous camps, and likewise he spent time as one of the summer volunteer cooks. Jerry has generously contributed his time, talent, and treasure to Esopus in numerous ways for many years. Through his influence, the MBCE has frequently been the recipient of substantial grants from the Palisades Foundation, and his witness and legacy as an active board member and benefactor to Esopus has greatly secured the future of Esopus. It has paved the way for many others to follow his example of servant leadership.
Each of tonight's MBCE Hall of Fame recipients have fostered the incredible mission of the MBCE in profound and extraordinary ways. While there will be many other equally deserving Hall of Fame recipients in future years, we must never forget the outstanding impact of the inaugural MBCE Hall of Fame class of 2021.